Hello, this is Chuck Ridgway, Automation Technology Manager at Horner. Thanks for joining us for another Tuesday live stream. Well, we're working our way through 2 months of OCS360 content. Here's today's very important topic: user management in OCS360. Now, up until now, we've been showing you how to set up OCS360 as the tenant administrator. In other words, the person with all the power to create dashboards and create alarms and that sort of thing. Today, we're going to show you how to add additional users, folks that can operate OCS360, but they don't have the power necessarily to set everything up. So that's very important because obviously OCS360 is much more useful when you have multiple people using it. All right, so without further ado, let's get right to it and let's break down today's topic. Okay, we're going to start with our one-slide review of OCS360. Then we're going to pivot to what is user management. We're going to talk about the differences between tenants and customer groups and users. And then we're going to walk you through the user management process so you can create users and give them the access that you want. And of course, there will be plenty of demonstrations. But before we dive into this topic, we're going to bring in our special guest who has joined us through every single episode of the series. So here's Don Clutterbuck. How you doing today, Don?
Doing great.
Awesome.
How are you?
Doing great. So today we're talking about user management with OCS 360. So what role does user management play in OCS 360?
Yep. Think of it as an org chart. So if you're using OCS 360 in a plant, you could have different locations, different machines, different devices scattered throughout the plant. You can segregate that and only allow certain people to see device number one, certain people device number two. Or if you're an OEM that has multiple machines across the country, you can segregate it as, Florida, California, New York, and the devices connected up to that. So it's just a way of organizing your data a little bit better.
Yeah, and I can see where, you could also split it up kind of like the hierarchy of your org chart. Your management people should see one thing, your production people should see another, that sort of thing.
Right, and then you can, assign different dashboards to the management, the maintenance guys, the techs, and so forth. So it just allows you to separate the information more logically.
Sure, and the beauty of OCS 360 is there's no restriction on how many dashboards you can create. So you can customize and tailor for the audience, which is really cool because obviously the more people using OCS 360 in the organization, probably the more effective it will be.
Correct. Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll dive right into user management. And thanks again, Don, for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, let's start with our one-slide review of OCS 360, which is Horner's new cloud service. And it's the easiest possible way you can get to push data from your OCS all-in-one controller to the cloud. OCS 360 allows you to perform dashboarding, alarm annunciation and notification. It performs data recording for up to 5 years, and it's supported by Prime and Canvas. And when it pushes data to the cloud, it uses a special free version that's included with those controllers for pushing data to OCS 360. And OCS 360 is free for the first 90 days. So you can sign up, you can try it out, and then after 90 days, you can decide, is this right for me, or should I cancel now without penalty? Now on to today's topic. Today, we're going to talk about user management. What is user management? Well, it's the process of creating authorized OCS 360 users by the tenant. What is a tenant? Well, the tenant is the OCS 360 administrator. Probably you if you're watching this video. The tenant has full access and has the ability to add devices, which are OCSs, to OCS 360. The tenant can create dashboards, set up alarms and notifications, all those things we've shown you how to do over the past few weeks. And the tenant can also set up customer groups and users and assign their access privileges. That's our main focus for today. We've started with the tenant. Now let's go all the way down to the user level. What can users do? Well, if they've been given access by the tenant, users can view devices, OCS controllers, see if they're online or not. They can view and operate dashboards. Okay, no problem. They can also receive alarm messages and react to alarms and notifications. Now, what about creating any of these things I've just talked about? Users never have the ability to configure OCS360, which means they can't create devices or add them to the system. They can't create dashboards, and they can't create alarms and notifications. However, as a user, they can use all these features as long as the tenant administrator has provided that access to them. All right, so now let's walk through the user management process before we demonstrate this all to you live from OCS360. Okay, all right, so let's start with the concept that all users are managed through customer groups. So the first step before you can create a user, you have to create a customer group that they will belong to. Now, how should you create a customer group, or how should you arrange your users or group your users? Well, you can do it in a variety of different ways, whatever works best for your application. Maybe you want to group your users by location, maybe by a specific plant location, that sort of thing. So every user in that plant would have the same user access level, if you will, or the same basic, they would share the same user characteristics. Or maybe that doesn't make sense. Maybe what makes sense more would be for you to have a group of maintenance users and a group of engineering users and a group of management users. So you could create customer groups based on that. And then each of those individual groups would have their own access and their own dashboards and things based upon their requirements. So that's really up to you as to how you create your customer group in terms of how you're going to, group together your particular users. All right. Now, again, the first step is to create a customer group. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, you're going to go into the customer group area and you're going to add a customer group. We're going to walk you through that process here in a few minutes. Now, once you've done that, created your customer group, now you need to add users. How do you do that? Well, you start by diving into that particular customer group that you just have created, or drilling into it, so to speak. And then you're going to start adding users with the plus icon there at the bottom right. Okay, now when you add a new user, the key credential is their email address. Okay, so the most prominent field is that email address. So you're going to add email address, name, phone number, and it should be obviously a phone number that can receive text messages if that is your goal. Okay, and you should, once you've created that user, then what's going to happen is you're going to have an activation link that ultimately needs to be delivered to the user so they can sign in to OCS360 for the first time. And when they do that, that's when they'll create their own individual password for logging in to OCS360. Okay, so that's how you add an individual user. And of course, in a particular customer group, you're likely going to have multiple users. Okay, now, how are you going to provide dashboards that can be viewed by your users or by your customer groups? Well, you may have already created that dashboard. It may be one you've already got. Then it's really just a matter of providing access or assigning that dashboard to your customer group. Okay, so for a particular dashboard, that's something I want my group, the maintenance team, for instance, to have access to. So you go into that particular dashboard, you click on the appropriate icon, and then you add that particular customer group to have access to that particular page. Now, any particular dashboard could have multiple customer groups assigned to it, so that's not a problem. It could be a dashboard you want management and maintenance and the engineering team all to have access to. That's no problem. So you can assign multiple customer groups to the same dashboard. All right. You also, in addition to assigning dashboards to customer groups, you can also, if you choose, assign devices to a customer group. Okay, so why would you do that? Well, maybe, let's say the maintenance team are the ones who are in charge of, keeping all the controllers online. And so let's assign that task or assign that controller or that device to that particular customer group. So you can do that. All right, no problem. One thing to keep in mind of though, and that is only one customer group plus the tenant administrator can be assigned to a device. Okay, so you can't have multiple, both the engineering group and the maintenance group, both could not be assigned to one particular device. One customer group per device. All right, now let's talk about alarms. How do we assign alarms to users? Okay, well, basically, of course, because users are managed through customer groups, we're going to be assigning alarms through the customer groups. So we're going to go to the alarm section of OCS 360, and then we're going to effectively go into the alarm configuration, all right? And we have the ability, if we choose, to propagate alarms not only to the tenant administrator, but also to propagate certain alarms to customer groups. Okay, how do we do that? Well, we can do that by going into an individual alarm that we've previously created. Okay, and under the advanced settings area, which you'll find in that square red box at the bottom center, you can choose to propagate this alarm to a customer group and also propagate the alarm to the tenants. And in that scenario, anytime there is an alarm condition that occurs, or this alarm condition occurs, then you have the ability for that particular user to see that alarm status on their alarm screen. And they can react to it by assigning somebody to it or by acknowledging it, that sort of thing. So what this does is this does nothing with notifications per se, but what this does is give you the ability to have an alarm notification be propagated to a customer group so they can see it from the alarm section of OCS 360. Okay. Now let's talk about sending notifications, emails, text messages, etc., to a customer group. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we start by going to the notification center. Makes sense, right? And what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to create a new recipient group. Okay, so we go to Notification Center, we go to the Recipients tab, and we add a new recipients group. All right. And we basically add that customer group to that recipients group. All right, now, there could be scenarios where multiple customer groups are on the same recipient list, so that's possible as well. But the first time you create a new customer group, more than likely you're going to need to create a new recipients list also, or recipients group. All right, once you've done that, now you can either add that recipient group that you've just created to an existing alarm rule. Okay, so let's say you decide that, okay, I want my maintenance folks to get the same alarms and all the same alarms that my tenant administrator is getting. That's the scenario I have. Let's say that's your scenario. In that scenario, you've already created the recipient group. Now you just need to add that recipient group to the existing new alarm rule. So anytime a new alarm is generated, in addition to the tenant administrator receiving that alarm notification, this new group you've just created is also going to receive that alarm notification as well. So that's the simplest scenario. Create the new recipients group and then add that recipients group to an existing rule. However, that doesn't have as much flexibility. That means that the message that is sent is in the exact same format as the one the tenant administrator receives, and it's for all the alarms that the tenant administrator receives. So maybe instead, you either want to change the content of the message, what the message wording is, or maybe you want to change which alarms get sent to that particular recipient group. So in those two scenarios, let's say you want to have different messaging as part of the alarms. Well, you need to create a new template. Okay, that alarm template is basically what puts the words in the message, whether it's email or SMS, that enunciates the alarm. So if you want that to be different than what's being currently sent to the tenant administrator, you need a new template. Also, what if you don't want all the alarms to go to this particular recipient group? Maybe you only want a subset of the alarms. All right, well, in that case, you need to create a new rule so that only the appropriate alarms that you're looking for get sent to this particular recipient group. Now, what I will show you when we do the demonstration here in a minute is that in the case of creating new templates and new rules, it's generally easiest to copy an existing one first and then modify it to your needs, as opposed to creating a new one from scratch. You can do either, they both work, but definitely copying an existing template or an existing rule and then modifying it is much easier. Okay, so hopefully I've kind of walked you through the process of user management. Now let's demonstrate it on the bench. Now let's demonstrate the user management process from OCS360 directly. Okay, so I'm logged in to OCS360 as the tenant administrator, which means I can make whatever changes I want to make. I have full access to that. So let's start. If we want to add users, we need to start by adding customer groups. So let's go to the customer groups area of OCS360. There you go. And you can see I've already created a customer group called the Indianapolis Maintenance Team. All right, and if you want to add, when I added this group, what I did originally, because there was nothing listed here, is I used the plus button to add that customer group. And then it was just a matter of filling out the information. If you want to see what the information looked like after the fact, well, here's basically what I filled in. It was the name of the particular customer group. I put a description in. This is for the Indianapolis Maintenance Team, maintenance users, access for the Indianapolis facility. I filled in address and city, state, that sort of thing. All right, and then I didn't bother to put in either phone number or email because I'm going to be adding individual users to this particular customer group that will have their own emails and phone numbers. Okay, so that was what it took to create that customer group. What about users for that customer group? How do I add those? Well, originally, and just like now, okay, we need to navigate to the user list by pressing this icon right here, okay, for this particular customer group. And you can see I've already added a particular user called Bob White, okay? So we've got here his first name, last name, and his email. And of course, there's also a phone number in there for Bob that we can see. Of course, I put bogus information in here just for demonstration purposes, but you can see what I filled in here. The key thing here was his email. And then if we want him to receive text messages, he needs to have a phone number, which is text message compatible. In other words, a cellular number here. So that was really all it was about adding Bob. Now remember when I showed you on the screen, when I added Bob, okay, there was an activation code that was generated when I did that process. And then I take that activation code, that activation link, and send that off to Bob so he can start the process of logging in for the first time to OCS360. And then when he does that, using that activation code or that activation link, then he'll create his own login password. And here we go. I can also take a look at that activation link here, okay, after the fact. Okay, so that's the link that needs to go to Bob. All right, I could just copy that and then send him a separate email for that. All right, or I could actually resend the activation in the form of an email, okay, directly. All right, so that's what it takes to kind of add a user to the system, okay? Pretty straightforward stuff. Now let's add some access for our customer group, which of course is our Indianapolis Maintenance Team, so that they can actually have something to access from within OCS360. All right, and let's start by assigning them to some dashboards. All right, so let's say that we want them to have access to not only the Indianapolis Maintenance Team having access to the tanks, which I've already done for the purposes of showing you in slide form, but let's say we also want them to have the process history and the gauges. So how can we add the Indianapolis Maintenance Team as one of the customer groups for those two dashboards? All right, so really all we have to do is for that particular dashboard, let's start with process history. we can go to Manage Assigned Customer Groups, okay? And then we have the list of them. Now, currently there's only one. If we had several, they'd all be available from this pull down. I'll select the maintenance group, okay? And then, like I mentioned in the slides, you can have multiple customer groups having access to the same dashboard, so that's not a problem. But I've gone ahead and added the Indianapolis maintenance team to process history, and let's go ahead and add them again to gauges. Again, manage assigned customer groups here, entity list, pull them from the list, and we're good there. Hit update, and that's all there is to that. Now let's go ahead and assign a device to this particular customer group. And why would we do that? Why would we assign a device to a customer group? Well, I've switched to the device screen here, and you can see I've got one device pushing data to OCS360. As I mentioned earlier, maybe the maintenance group is in charge of keeping this particular controller online, so it makes sense to basically add them to this particular device as being assigned to it. So we do that once again by hitting the Assign to Customer Group button here. All right, and then all the customer groups that are available are here, which of course there's only the one currently. Now, this is an important difference. You only have the ability to assign one customer group to a device, not multiple, just one. Okay, so that's a difference that I need to point out there. All right, so now the Indianapolis maintenance team, when they log in, when individual users log in, currently we've only got Bob White here, then they will have the ability to see what I'm seeing right now, and that is that the device is active or not, if that was the case. And again, they have the full ability to manage this particular device. All right, now let's get these guys some alarms and notification with this new customer group. All right, so I'm going to start by going to alarms. All right, and one of the ways I can look at all my existing alarm rules is by going to alarms and pressing the plus key. And then that's going to show me all of my alarm rules that I've created. And I've only created a couple, okay? Now, if you only want, or if you do want, without a lot of extra configuration, your customer group to receive alarm information on their OCS360 alarm section, then all you have to do, if that customer group has already been assigned to a device, is you can go into these alarm rules, and under advanced settings, you can make sure this checkbox right here is checked, propagate alarm to entity owner. If your customer group owns the entity or the device that's generating the alarm, okay, then you can check this checkbox, and then this particular alarm will go to them on their OCS360 screen. Okay, now I've also got it set up to go to the tenant as well. All right, and I've done the same thing on both of these alarms. I had previously made this change. Okay, all right, so again, in our advanced settings, we make sure that that is checked. And then in OCS360 only, they'll get the alarm information there. Okay, now what if they want notifications via email or SMS? Then we need to go to the Notification Center, and we start in the Recipients tab. So if we want a customer group to receive any kind of notification, either email, SMS, etc., then we're going to need to add a recipient group that they're tied to. So let's do that now. I'll hit the Add Recipients. It'll be called Indy Maintenance Recipients. All right, that's just what I chose to call it. All right, so it'll be for customer group users from the customer group Indianapolis Maintenance Team. Okay, there we go, and I could add a description here if I wanted. I'll skip that for now. Okay, so I've added a recipient group. Now, what if all we want is for them to receive the same emails, the same SMSs for all the alarms that the tenant administrator is currently getting? Well, then we only have to make one more change if those are the situation, if that is the situation we are in. If that's what we want, then we can go to Rules, find the rule that we want to deal with, and that's going to be the new alarm rule. This is the rule that sends new alarm notifications out. We can click on that to edit it. All right. Okay. And in addition to the tenant administrator, we could add this group to this customer group to this alarm rule. All right. We've done that. We have to give this a name, so we're going to call it Indie Maintenance, okay, rule, etc. But I tell you what, I really don't want to do this. I could. It'd be very easy. All I have to do is hit add and we're done. But if I do this again, all the alarms with the same alarm messages will go to not only the tenant administrator, but it'll also go to my customer group that I just created. But what if I don't want the exact same messages on the exact same alarms? What if I want something a little more customized for the user? That's not unusual. Then what I'm going to do instead is I'll hit cancel here instead of hitting add. If I hit add, I'd be done. Okay, and I'll close that here. So instead of just changing the rule, I'm going to customize how I do notifications specifically for this group. And I'm going to do that. I've already created the recipient group. Now I'm going to create a new template. Why am I creating a new template? Well, this new template will allow me to send alarm messages that are a little bit different in terms of their content or their messaging than what the tenant administrator is getting. Okay, they could have more or less information, slightly different message, whatever you want there. So what I'm going to do, instead of creating a brand new template though, is I'm going to copy the template that exists for the new alarm notification, and I'm going to base my new template on this one. Okay, so I'm going to call this the Indie Maintenance. Keep getting that capital N there. Indie Maintenance New Alarm Notification. So I've renamed it. Okay, it's an alarm type. I still want all three types of messaging to go. Okay, and here is what shows up on the OCS360 page. I'll leave that the same. Here's what shows up in the email. I'm going to add an additional message to that. I'm going to say, please call your supervisor after acknowledging this message. Okay? Any kind of special instruction, any kind of variation, any of that would be okay. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and put that as my customization to make this a unique template. And when I go to the text message, okay, I could also add, I'll just put call supervisor here on the end after AC. There we go. And then I'll hit the add button, and there it is. I've got a new template that I've created for sending messages to my group. Okay. Next, I'm going to go to rules, and I need to create a new rule here as well. If I want to send alarms in different situations than what I send to the tenant administrator in terms of notifications, SMSs and emails. All right, so I'm, just like I did with the template, I'm going to base my new rule on an existing one. In this case, the new rule notification. So I'll hit copy rule, immediately rename it, calling it Indie Maintenance New Alarm. Trigger's going to be the alarm. The template I'm going to use is going to be the template I just created. First, before I hit this button here, we're going to get rid of new alarm notification. Now we can add the Indie New Maintenance New Alarm Notification as my template. Okay, so this is where we're able to say this is the template we want to send for our notification rule that we're building right now. All right, now, what do we want to have happen on the escalation chain? Do we want it to go to the tenant administrator? No. I want it to go to the Indie Maintenance recipients. Okay, and that's all I care about for now is in terms of the first recipient. Now, let's say I want to set up an escalation though. I can do that. I can add a stage, and I can say after some period of time, let's stay with the default of 1 hour. Let's add a recipient of the tenant administrator. Okay, so after an hour, we're going to notify him, and we're going to de-escalate it or stop the escalation as long as the alarm has been acknowledged. Okay, so what's going to happen here is we've created a new rule that uses the Indie Maintenance New Alarm Notification template, the one that's specialized for the maintenance guys. They're going to receive the alarm when it occurs. Okay, and after 1 hour, it is going to be elevated to the tenant administrator unless it's already been acknowledged. Okay, so that looks good. Now let's take a look at, yep, it's alarm that we want there. I think we've got everything the way we want. Now we hit next. Okay, this is where we need to specify which alarms we want to be handled this way. Okay, so I'm going to say that I only want certain alarms to be triggered, okay, and go through this alarm rule. All right, so I'm going to type in the alarm that I want to apply here. So what I'm going to say here is, in this scenario, I only want this to apply for my alarm, and this is where I'm typing in the exact alarm name, where pressure has reached a high level, okay? So this is the specific alarm that I want to trigger this particular rule. And I'm gonna, because I don't remember, I think I set it as a major alarm. I'm just gonna check all of these. That way, as I add alarms in the future to this list, you know, any of them can apply, and away we go. So for this specific alarm only, we'll send this alarm, and when the alarm is created, and then we can rename the rule here. And the rule that I copied was for tenant administrators. Now we're going to change it to any maintenance. All we're doing here is changing a description. All right, and I can hit add. Okay, so we've done everything we need to do. Let me recap. We've added a recipient group called any maintenance recipients. If all we wanted to do was add them to the existing alarms in the same format that is going to the tenant administrator, we could just modify the new alarm here, okay? All right. However, what we wanted to do instead for the IndyMail recipient group is we created a new template up here to customize their message a little bit. And then we created a new rule up here, which basically is only going to send that notification for one specific alarm. And I could list others and modify this rule in the future if I want to add additional alarms to their specific situation or for this particular rule. Okay, so that wraps up our first look at user management for OCS 360. As I wrap up, let me remind you that if you want to try out OCS 360, you will need Seascape 10.1 and firmware 17.1 for your Canvas or Prime controller. Those are all available on the website. And of course, you'll need an internet connection for your OCS controller, wired, wireless, or cellular, doesn't make any difference. Okay, and you'll need an OCS 360 subscription. All right, so what do the OCS 360 subscriptions look like? Well, there they are on the screen. The main difference between them is the amount of data per device that can be sent per minute. With Silver, it's 250 variables per minute. With Gold, it's 500 variables per minute. And with Platinum, it's 1,000 variables per minute. And remember, you can try out OCS 360, sign up as normal, okay? And after 90 days, you can decide if it's right for you. And if it's not, you can cancel with absolutely no penalty. Your credit card will not be charged. And basically, you've learned a lot about OCS 360 and maybe why it didn't work for you. But we've got a lot of confidence that once you try it out, you're going to find that gathering all that data and doing the alarming and the dashboarding has a lot of value to your business. Okay, OCS training coming up in 2025. Don't hesitate to check your calendars and make arrangements now by signing up on our website. We're participating in a lot of different trade shows this year. Here are the biggies coming up. May 12th through 15th in Detroit is Automate. It's the biggest pure automation show in the United States these days. I highly recommend you check it out. That's the next one on the docket in May. Okay, lots of ways to interact with Horner Automation online, whether that's on our website at hornerautomation.com, on our YouTube channel, or on LinkedIn. Okay, as I've mentioned many times, February and March are OCS 360 months, all right, and we've still got a couple more big topics left, so by the end of March, you are going to be fully versed on OCS 360. And our next topic is going to be rule chains. We're going to introduce you to this powerful feature, rule chains, in next week's episode. Okay, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, don't hesitate to do so. It doesn't cost anything. And if you choose notifications when you subscribe, you'll be notified every time we go live or every time we post a new video. Okay, so until next week, let's all get out there and do us some good.